Israel actually, on the other hand, heading towards an election. And Netanyahu has faced some difficulties at home. And also just today, Iran foreign minister said that Tehran is ready for the renegotiation about the nuclear deals if the Biden administration lift all the sanctions against Iran. And also during the pre-election campaign, Biden seemed to be ready for the new nuclear negotiation with Iran. If you combine all this together, how will America approach the region during the Biden administration? And if there will be a renegotiation or nuclear deal with Iran, what can America ask from Iran in return for this negotiation? For instance, can America say that, okay, back up from Lebanon or Iraq or Yemen and Syria? What do you say?
Wow, what a question. I mean, I think the easy part is probably the first steps, because what you don't usually do is you don't go to the negotiating table just like that and have like a big ceremony and here we are talking. You prepare the way through back channel talks, very quiet talks. So back in 2012, I think it was, the Americans and the Iranians were in what we call these back channel, these quiet talks, not high level officials, lower level officials. And they were talking in Oman, right? And Oman was the broker, and the Supreme Leader's political aide, the former Foreign Secretary, Mr. Valiati, was involved. You look at that possibly similar process now, because the advantage of back channel quiet talks is it doesn't embarrass anybody or put anybody in a difficult situation. It doesn't put Rouhani in a difficult situation while he's campaigning for re-election. It doesn't put the Biden administration in a difficult situation with Congress, where the Republicans will hold out against the negotiations. It doesn't put Netanyahu in a difficult position publicly while he's trying to survive, right? As long as the talks remain very quiet. Mm-hmm. There are two problems. The first immediate problem is a practical one, and that is, until you get the Iranian presidential election completed, you can't do much beyond the back channel talks because you don't know who's going to be in power. You know the Supreme Leader is in power, but you don't know if it's the hardliners or the centrist who form the government. So there's not much that will be done before autumn of 2021. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen on a step-by-step basis. So for example, what do the Iranians want? Well, the Iranians are not expecting that the Americans will immediately come back into the agreement, but they want some lifting of sanctions. So the Americans will say, all right, we'll consider lifting some of the sanctions the Trump administration put on, right? And we'll talk about that. Mm-hmm. What do the Americans, and importantly, the other 5+1 powers, because they're still there, they're still in the agreement, the Europeans, the Chinese, and the Russians, what do they want? Well, what the Europeans want is they want the Iranians to put their missile program on the table. So it's not just a question of nuclear weapons, it's the long-range missiles that Iran could develop. They want that now discussed. The Europeans, as well as the Americans, also want a discussion on the end dates for when the agreement stops. Because right now, the current nuclear deal, some provisions end in 2025. What happens then? So you would have a negotiation which talks about not just simply resuming the deal, but developing it. What happens with sanctions? What happens with missiles? What happens with the terms? And all of that's there. But then you raise another question. And this is the big question that was not addressed in 2015. The 2015 nuclear deal did nothing about Syria. It did nothing about Iraq. It did nothing about Lebanon. In other words, the nuclear deal was always a pawn on a chessboard where the big pieces were these conflicts. And you hoped that by getting confidence over the nuclear issue, you could talk about these bigger issues. That never happened. There's never been an agreement in Syria. There's never been an agreement over Iraq. There's never been an agreement over Yemen, where, remember, the Saudis got involved with their military intervention in 2015. You have to start by getting back and dealing with the nuclear issue. That's the headline issue. But you have got to start talking about a regional accommodation where everybody can live and let live. And everybody knows that. It's just, how do you get to that point?
Okay, thank you so much for this. As far as I understand, again, from your evaluations, we should wait for a while because there are some kind of like elections are going to be held in Iran and Israel, and to see what's going to happen in that respect. Because if hardliner or reformer comes to Iran, will change the talks or negotiations with the America. So basically, America will have some kind of like a wait and see approach, and they also use backdoor channels for the diplomacy from the beginning, and then later on we will see how it develops.
Let me give you two signals to watch for, which I think would be immediate. The first is, of course, you just watch whether there is any sign of a military confrontation. And that's both a direct confrontation, like another strike on, strikes inside Iran. Mm-hmm. And it's also any type of military confrontation in the region, right? Whether it's through proxies, whether it's in Yemen, for example, whether it's in Syria or Iraq. Secondly, you watch Iran's oil shipments. Mm-hmm. Because what has happened is that Iran's oil shipments, which are still the key source of revenue for the country, are down between 80 and 95% since 2018. Because it's not just the direct American sanctions, but it's indirect, which is if the Americans catch you dealing with the Iranians, whichever country you're from, they'll sanction you as well, right? That includes Turkey, for example. Okay. Will the Biden administration back off that threat to sanction other countries indirectly, as it were, for dealing with Iran? In other words, can Iran increase its oil shipments and increase some of its non-oil trade, such as what we might call it, its petrochemical exports, which are quite important? If you see that happening, and therefore you would then see the Iranian currency start to stabilize after this historic drop, then you know that the situation is improving for the chance of negotiations.
Okay, so basically, if we see any kind of like escalations in the region, this is going to be one sign. And also all restrictions over the Iran's oil export also is going to be some kind of like a sign for you to see how the Biden administration will follow, which steps they will follow. Thank you so much, Scott, for today. I appreciate your thoughts. Hope to see you again. Take care.
Peace to you and all your viewers. Take care.